peeps? All right, we're back. We're going to do just a short one today because it's going to be a few days since I can jump back on and just want to talk about some of the stuff going on recently. A lot of it's more of the same. But there has been some interesting stuff going on. So I'll wait till some of you guys can get on and then we'll take it from there. Jump in, drop a comment in the chat. If you're around, drop a comment in the chat. I know we'll have a smaller crowd tonight. Drop a comment in the chat though if you're around, and we'll take it from there. Take it from there indeed. Give me a second actually. What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up, peeps? Got the dark room. What's up, crew? What's up, crew? What's good? What's good? All right. I just wanted to drop a couple things here because I expect that it'll be a few days before I can jump back on, and there's two main things I want to bring up. With this. First off, just to show you guys the wine, we got a Julianas, which is a brewery cru. It's a Beaujolais cru, and it's not a bigger appellation in Beaujolais. It's very nice. It's very, very nice. I wish I had more of it. I really wish I had more of it. It's good stuff. But look, just a short one tonight. Of course, I'll answer some questions if you guys have it, but by the way, it's like raspberry juice. That's what we're talking about here with this wine. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about first off was timeline shifts. So I don't know if you guys noticed it, but something happened since pretty much our last chat. Sometime in the last 24 to 48 hours, there is a fellow Merlot over here, nice fruity waft, bit of a cardboard overtone. I'm sure it's delicious. Delicious, Jeff. Now look, there's something shifted, and there's been a couple of weird stuff that I've noticed that have occurred in the last few days. But first off, let me just talk about timeline shifts and what happens. The most obvious examples are the easiest ones to give. You can feel how, for those of you who remember 9/11, remember how the world felt one way the day before, and then after the event, it was like everything had changed. Everything had completely changed, right? And you can say, well, this event shifted everything, everything changed with that event, which is true in a linear perspective. But if you look at it from the perspective of timeline mechanics, you can actually see that a momentum that was going a certain direction got pivoted and moved a different direction. So, and this is what the black magicians do, right? They will do something that's going to harness all sorts of fear and energy, and then they direct it, they pivot it. And they've done this throughout history, right? whenever they see something going in a direction they don't like, they create some sort of event that traumatizes the public, and then they move that energy in a direction they want it to go to. I didn't read the thread about how it was the biggest timeline shift. Send me that, Elvis, on Twitter. I haven't seen that, but I can tell you that I've talked to friends about this, and there's a lot of weird Mandela effect stuff that occurred in the aftermath of that 9/11 timeline shift, including one of the interesting examples is the Statue of Liberty. So, were you able to take tours in the torch of the Statue of Liberty? Right? This is one of those things that many people are certain that was allowed. And I remember reading about it. I remember thinking it was a thing. Looking forward to doing that someday. But then you go and you read about it, and it's like, oh, it's never been open to public access. It was damaged in some I think explosion that happened like decades earlier. Really weird stuff. Really, really weird stuff. Reading about why you couldn't go in the torch in the Statue of Liberty because of some event that you have no recollection of ever hearing about before. And my friend, for instance, one of the things he was talking about is that he knows people. He recalls people going to it, like coworkers going to it. So really crazy, kooky stuff if you want to get down that rabbit hole. There was also a timeline shift after January 6th. I can tell you I felt that timeline shift. that was a very personal timeline shift. But this is the difference that's been going on, is that we have been moving timelines back into place much faster. So you can look at a lot of what Trump and the alliance, so to speak, are attempting, right? This whole thing, it goes back to Kennedy. Kennedy was an example of a timeline shift. I don't know if it was quite as powerful as 9/11. Probably not quite as powerful, but it was a very, very profound timeline shift. And you saw all the chaos that occurred in the aftermath of that, connected to Vietnam. You could actually argue it was more or less the same thing. Because in the aftermath of Kennedy's assassination, you had the Vietnam War, you had then the assassination of 3 other public figures, right? His brother, Robert, Malcolm X, MLK. And all of this stuff set the U.S. on a different trajectory than it was supposed to go to. 9/11 did the same thing. They were attempting to do that again with January 6th. It didn't work. It didn't work because we're getting better at noticing it and shifting things back into place, locking it back into place. And so a lot of the desperation we're seeing now is these attempts to do whatever they can to move the timelines. I can tell you that I have certainly experienced timeline shifts since, what would be 15 months ago. There have been a couple of occasions where I felt it happen, and it's mostly been improvement. There have been some setbacks at periods, but we pull it back. And indications of a timeline shift are stuff like everybody is all of a sudden really irritable and moody. Jeff, really good comment here. Very, very hard for me to notice timeline shifts. My PTS symptom of dissociation has me go numb in major situations. 9/11 and Jan 6 both gave me out-of-body experiences. Yeah, well, that's actually connected to it, right? That stuff that's relevant. That's a very relevant thing because we actually can often feel disembodied. It's almost as if, because you could argue what's happening is that consciousness is shifting from, you're not necessarily in your body for it. Consciousness is not embodied in that experience. So, not surprising at all. especially when you're very personally involved in the situation, right? An example of a timeline shift in a practical sense is, if you were in battle and you got shot, right? Was that a timeline that was going to happen? People talk about this stuff, these situations, as being like out of body experiences as well. And it's, it's just interesting to consider. Our consciousness isn't quite at the point of being able to really wrap our heads around it in a sense where it's second nature. And we're going to have all sorts of like questioning of, the rational mind is going to question all of this stuff and just say, oh, well, it's not what you thought it was. Okay, whatever. I don't give a fuck. I don't give a fuck. I can tell you that as I have become more sensitive and aware of this stuff, I've felt it more. And no, I don't see like, oh, the timeline shifted. Like, I don't feel that happen every 2 seconds. It's usually, I'm not at the level of sensitivity to it that I can, understand where, like, when it happens on a macro sense, because we have our individual timelines, right? When my father almost died in January, there was like a whole, like, that was a whole timeline thing, and the fact that he didn't, and then in the aftermath choice, I mean, there was a lot of individual personal choice nodes there. Now, as for the macro, that's a different story because there's a lot more things that come into picture. So you have maybe your own personal experiences, but your personal experiences are more subtle. You're looking much more for confirmatory trends, confirmatory actions. So, for instance, some of the personal things you might feel when a timeline shifts are going to be, irritability, maybe like messed up sleep schedule. But what's relevant is that most people are going to be feeling the same way around you. So it seems like everybody's maybe irritable. This is a negative shift, by the way. You could say the opposite. Everybody is somehow really getting along all of a sudden. Everything's really great. I don't assign enough significance to this on their own because you could get into all sorts of subjective stuff. And this is the issue with spirituality communities and stuff like that, which is, how do you know if it's genuine or if it's bullshit? Because a lot of people will just say this stuff because they want to feel like they're talking about it, and they'll take a passing emotion and they'll assign greater significance to it. I don't usually figure out that there's been a timeline shift until I've seen other things around it, or actually other people have also, who I trust, have commented similarly, right? So the Super Bowl was a big ritualistic attempt to shift timelines, and it seems like it pushed us into the war timeline. It also seems like something has happened with the last 2 days, because the Schumann resonance shut off. Now, it's just a monitoring mechanism. It doesn't mean that the Earth stopped beating, but it's very strange that the Schumann resonance monitors. The Schumann resonance is like the heartbeat of the planet. That shut off. And then it went back on. It was very weird. And in addition to that, there have now been a lot of stuff coming out from, psychics that I trust, that I think who have good intel. Michael St. Clair, his big download from, the Nordics, so to speak. And look, he's a level-headed person. He's follows the same people that we follow. He actually has personal relationships with Cliff High, and he knows these people. And he was in Swiss military intelligence. He's both military first and then psychic later. He's a much more quiet account, one that is not blown up so much, but I find him credible. At any rate, he's the one who tipped me off the Duran, by the way, those newscasters. He has now commented that what he's received is basically that I'm not trying to like freak people out or anything, because again, timeline shift stuff, but that we're now looking at, um, we are looking at some level of nuclear action and um, a climate catastrophe in a in the capacity of freezing, right, in North America, and that basically the northern part of America and Canada would be kaput essentially. And look, there's been a thing going on for a while talking about this. Cliff's talked about this for a while, about how we're actually going into an ice age. All the global warming stuff is a reason to attempt to amplify things that are with the ice age, to bring it about, to make it happen. Um, I haven't, to be honest, kept my pulse on this to a super strong extent. However, I am aware of how these ice age work, and I'm aware that they are cyclical. And I've done quite a bit of research about a decade ago into these Mihalkovich cycles with solar minimums, and what was apparent was that, yeah, day after tomorrow is some level of predictive programming with this. Exactly. It's very abrupt when it happens. It's a very abrupt thing, unfortunately. It and the main way that you tell it, it's not like this gradual thing, like each year gets colder and colder and colder necessarily. What you see is a collapse in the jet stream, and the jet stream gets weaker and more fragile, and we've been seeing that more and more. And actually, some of the things you see from that is a increase in warming in some areas and maybe cooling in others. It's unstable, and you have big weather fluctuations. One of the things I've noticed in the past 5 years is that the weather in Siberia, Europe, and the weather in North America, Canada, is rarely the same. So you'll have this weird stuff where America will be unseasonably warm and Europe's extra cold, or vice versa. So, but anyway, I saw the cycles, and I saw that if you just look at it mathematically, you could see that that's where we were going. But look, I'm not of the, well, there's another thing with this too, I'll say first. Also, the magnetic pole has been moving quite rapidly, and it's been moving south, I recall correctly, southeast across Canada. And the concern, from what I'm understanding, is with the pole shift is that where the pole is at one point changes. And so what this would effectively mean is that the pole would move somewhere over North America. There'd be this shift, and it's not like the flip shift where like everything is upside down, but it would essentially the planet would, from how it appears, that there would be significant freezing in Europe and North America, and Antarctica would actually move up a bit. And Siberia, I don't think, would actually be terribly messed up, just because of the location of it would be, maybe closer to like Labrador or something like that. Okay, so look, I'm saying all this stuff, and this is what St. Clair was talking about, and he was also essentially indicating that the Russians are aware of this, and that they have been, and that basically Russia's preparing for this. Russia's aware of what's happening to the planet, and they're preparing for this, and they're hell-bent on survival. Okay. I don't know how I feel about the whole thing, and I can tell you that it feels to me like a parallel timeline. That's what it feels like to me, if I have to be honest about it. It doesn't feel like the timeline we were on even just a few days ago. And it's not because that information is new to me. I just see that there's a higher coherence of it than there was before, and that this is a timeline that I think is wished for. This is like a reset timeline, though, essentially. I don't have the sense, if the frequency of the Earth goes up, the warming of the Earth goes up. And I don't have the sense from anything, going on with Trump or with Q or anything like that, that any of this reality is going to happen. And to be honest, I don't have a feeling of this sort of catastrophic collapse of civilization that is basically remnants starting over. I will say that there have been some population prediction maps, released by the usual suspects, who saw a massive movement of population to Mexico and southern U.S. and Mexico, and very, very bad outcomes in the rest in Europe, and basically completely corresponding with St. Clair's download. Again, though, what I would say is that, well, why did he get this download now all of a sudden? Where did this come from? And this is obviously something that they have been trying to predictively program, as you set up above. This is the day after tomorrow. It's a very similar scenario to the day after tomorrow. I mean, remember at the very end, Americans are going across the border to Mexico because basically the northern half of the U.S. and Canada is iced over. Europe is iced over up until basically the south of France, right? It's a total glaciation. So but the point of that is that they put that stuff out there because they're trying to do this predictive programming on us. So why would the timeline shift all of a sudden? Why would it shift? Because there's also been other things, right? I mean, Magenta was putting some stuff out there about a big push against the children with the vax, which as far as I'm concerned, I'll be quite honest, I thought that was over. But is there going to be another push with all this other negative stuff? We have Zelensky now in front of Congress, in front of multiple European governments, which all seem completely foaming at the mouth for war. St. Clair talked about there being some nuclear events. Is it that some of these nuclear events create a localized cooling effect, which then cascades and amplifies this very delicate potentiality for an ice age? Is it possible that the ice age wasn't going to happen, but that it's a very fragile dynamic? Because I'll also remind you guys that as a planet raises its consciousness, the swings don't become so extreme like that anymore. The Earth is moving up itself. So then I bring you back to, again, we have the fact of the Schumann resonance shut off. And the first thing a lot of these spirituality chicks said was timeline shift. What the heck is going on? Timeline shift. So I can tell you that I felt some of this on a personal level, but I didn't think much of it. I never jump to this until I saw these other things come together. And then, and this is the big thing, guys, this is the big thing. And then I realized that they started up CERN on March 15th. And when I say that, I get some serious energy. When it came to my head, I was in the gym and I was trying to figure this out, and then it hit. And it was like, oh my God. They started up CERN again. And we all know that that's the purpose of CERN. CERN, the Large Hadron Collider, is designed to disrupt the fabric of reality. It's designed to pull things in a different direction. And from what I understand, the reason that they even created CERN was because they realized that all of their looking glass tech was leading to the same outcome. And so their hypothesis was, there's no way that we can stop our collapse in this current reality. There's no way we can shift the timelines and avoid it. So their idea was to tear the fabric of the timelines so that then they could break off that inevitable singularity which was going against them. I mean, it's very advanced, complicated stuff. This is mostly their top scientists and dark magicians, etc. Yes, there were concerns that the collider might create its own black hole because they're literally trying to tear apart. I mean, remember when we dropped nuclear weapons back in the 1940s, back in 45, that that immediately in the aftermath of that led to tons and tons of ET presence on this planet. Now, of course, the Nazis were connected to the reptilians, etc. But it was in the aftermath of that that there was massive UFO presence, because nuclear technology does a very similar thing. It really fucks with timeline mechanics. It fucks with the fabric of reality. It's not simply something that is like bad for the environment or whatever. It disrupts the space-time continuum, and so there was a response for it from what we understand, all these various ET groups who were, like the, Galactic Federation, etc. All the stuff with 1947, the Treaty of Giardia, blah, 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 right? A lot of you guys are familiar with this stuff already about the deal Eisenhower didn't actually make, but Majestic 12 made, and led to the abductions and everything. The point is that nuclear explosions created a ripple effect throughout the entire galaxy and was not a positive thing. It's not a positive thing for everybody. And so I can only imagine, I'm not a particle physicist, but I can only imagine that, it's funny, actually, I'll just say this real quick. Donald must absolutely come back as part of the timeline. That dark MAGA trend started at the same time all this stuff happened. So maybe dark MAGA is part of the, that sort of goth trend that just came up. Maybe that evolved as a result of this. But I can only imagine that the Hadron Collider is on a similar but more controlled and greater level to the nuclear explosions. So, not at all black-pilled whatsoever, because here's the thing. Look at what they're doing to try to shift the timeline. And it's not the first time they've tried to shift the timeline. It's not the first time they've succeeded. They have succeeded in shifting the timeline. But the thing is, once they shift the timeline, it doesn't mean that they control it. It doesn't mean that it stays there. We can snap it back. We can pull it back. And we've done it over and over again. Okay? Like, I can tell you on a personal level with my case, there are different timelines that compete with each other. And throughout this process, I felt like I've embodied different realities of myself, different outcomes of myself. We can shift this back. We will shift it back. I actually don't think it's going to take terribly, terribly long, because at the end of the day, what they're fighting against, it's not even that they're fighting against us, they're fighting against God. Okay? This stuff is extreme desperation, because they know where things are going. They're doing everything they possibly can to change it to their doomsday scenario. I don't personally believe it, and I think it has some fragile coherence right now, but I don't think it has, long-term permanent coherence. I think we're going to see this snap back again. I think we will, because they can't force us, who are sovereign, aware individuals, into a timeline that we don't want to be in. They can't do it. There's too many of us now. Yes, Jeff, so this is the big point, is that nukes, hadron colliders, all this stuff, these are all variations of you could say black magic stuff, right? You could argue that. I mean, I don't think that a nuke is black magic, but you could say it's that kind of technology that gets to the point of being timeline disruptive. And it is a form of dealing with energy. I mean, from what I understand on an esoteric level with nukes, the splitting of the atom, it's kind of like a quantum leak, is what it is. It's at any rate, it has an enormous amount of power, but at the end of the day, consciousness is the high ground, because consciousness brings you closer to God and becomes a mechanism of God, right? And we are at this juncture here. There's massive astral battles going on. And a lot of you guys notice this when you go to sleep. There's massive, massive astral battles that are going on. By the way, just a little touch of that cognac, Ukrainian cognac, which I think might end up being the COVID CABAL drink while this war's going on. Because why not? I've had it for so many years, I have barely even touched it. So it might as well be the COVID CABAL drink. But anyway, I wanted to bring this to people's attention because the Hadron Collider hits, all this stuff is happening, and they are really, really trying to manufacture consent right now for this war. They want this nuclear war. They want it so badly. And remember, this is the stuff that Juan was saying, is that they want the nuclear war, and our guys want it too. Not the war itself, but they want the standoff. Because in the standoff, they gain the control permanently. I think, personally, what we will see happen is an escalation. There's going to be some kinetic action. That's the timeline that they pulled us into. Will it stay there? Will it snap back? You can even see, just for an idea, in the last couple of weeks, that there's been a couple of these push forward, snap back, push forward, snap back. They're making a really big offensive right now, energetically, to make it happen. But no, AJ, I don't think you have to worry about ICBMs or anything like that. Look, I don't think we have to worry about anything. I'm not in alignment with this timeline. I want to just talk about it because I know that we've shifted. I just don't think we're going to stay here. That's the point. This was a big shift. The thing I have to say about them, though, is that if they can make certain things happen, then that timeline node has like a length to it. So for instance, if they can get Putin to invade Ukraine, then there's a war in Ukraine. We have to ride out that timeline now because it's started. Now, is it possible that that can end on an easier term? Sure. But what they do is they're trying to get energy behind their timeline, so it's like they're really pushing it, because if they push it and they can push it enough in the right direction, it's like they can get over a hurdle. And then maybe there's more energy to that next level because the stakes are higher. So by starting the war, now they have more energy of the population who are focused on it, who care about it. And then that energy moves to the next level where now there's a kinetic action, and that energy moves to the next action. You see this stuff, if you go back to past wars, there's this sort of confusion about, well, why did things keep going, and why was there no de-escalation? Like, look at World War One. How did that assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, how did that progress into a world war? There were so many diplomatic collapses that occurred in July 1914. How did this stuff happen? Right? How did it happen? The point of it is that there were these same black magicians behind the scenes pushing this trajectory, pushing this war trajectory. At that time, actually, it was Germany who was being manipulated, not... well, actually, Britain was manipulating all of them. Let's be honest here. That's what was going on. But um, the point of all this stuff is that they would, if they were able to push the tension to a certain point, then people naturally just start to get on board with it, even if they don't want to be on board with it, right? Even if they didn't want to be on board with it before, even if it didn't make any sense to be on board with it, things start to develop a life of their own. And we can see this escalation right now with the war and how they keep moving towards it, I think that the nukes are intended to be fake, in the sense that I don't believe that there is going to be a nuclear war. But I do sense that there's a push towards this collapse. It's possible. And when I say nuke stuff, I don't necessarily, it's not like a nuclear holocaust where ICBMs flying everywhere. I think that if this were ever to happen, it would be limited to like a tactical situation. And by the way, a tactical nuke is basically like you could wipe out a mile and isn't very dirty. Like, tactical nuclear weapons are arguably of a similar caliber to daisy cutters. If you guys remember those things, we dropped them a few times in Afghanistan because, the United States just fucking drops bombs all over the place. But it's like a 2,000 pound, it's probably much more than that. I'm probably getting it wrong. Conventional bomb, and it would basically wipe out a square mile. Tactical nuclear weapons are actually quite similar. They're not strategic ICBMs, which are world enders. You would use a tactical nuclear weapon in a conventional war. That's the idea behind it. I will reiterate over and over again. I don't actually see any nuclear stuff happening. I agree it's a scare event. It's going to feel like it's going to happen. It's not actually going to happen. I totally agree with that. I totally agree with all that stuff. I am just making the point that there is this darker timeline that's being shifted into, that they're trying to be shifted into. I don't know, at the end of the day, if these people would be opposed to a nuclear war if they can't get what they want, right? Like, they are criminally insane. They're criminally insane. And this is the one thing. They are never going to step backwards. They're never going to do it. That's the problem. They will keep going further and further. It doesn't matter if they get called out, if they get caught. They will keep moving forward. And they will trash everything that they possibly can in the process. They want the CBDCs. They're already setting plans to roll them out. Joe Rogan and Maji Nawaz, I probably said his name wrong, but very good interview on this, talking about it. He gave some more details about how it's not simply that it's going to be on the blockchain and it'd be a competitor to Bitcoin and everything, but that your salary would go to it, but that your employer, if they didn't like what you were saying or, whatever, that they could shut you off, and they could shut you off for how far you could go in transportation, and they could control what you eat. So, maybe you only get to have 2 burgers per month. The rest of your burgers have to be bugs, right? All that stuff is coming. It's coming sooner than we think it's coming. It's going to stack on and on and on. So yeah, I don't think that there's going to be a nuke stuff, but I want to talk about the timeline mechanisms and stuff. They are definitely fucking with the timelines right now. They're fucking with them. And right here, what we're doing right now, we want to be aware of that. But fundamentally, we're going to shift it back. We're going to shift it back to golden age 2030s, 2040s, right? We are not going to consent to this massive global collapse that they're trying to orchestrate. Elvis, that's why Bill Gates talking about the plague and smallpox, once their backs are really up against the wall, they will try to take as many people with them. Exactly. And actually, I've mentioned this before, but you know what's interesting is that the nuclear fear, I can tell you in America, I feel zero sense of threat from a nuclear war. Absolutely zero threat of any of that. Um, I think that the scare is actually more likely to be a European scare. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First off, this would be an escalation of a conventional altercation. So, they decide to throw peacekeepers or a no-fly zone into Ukraine. NATO pilot gets shot down. Because I guarantee you, NATO flies planes or fires a missile from Poland or whatever into to attack Russian positions. Russia's going to fire right back. They're not going to even give a fuck about it at this point. They just sent a lot of their military command to the Ural Mountains. That means that they're prepared for a nuclear standoff. And by the way, I'll also mention that all the big Russian cities have very, very developed nuclear bunkers. So the Russians are more prepared for this on multiple different levels. They're prepared to go the whole way. It's life or death for them anyway, as far as they're concerned. But again, the ICBM stuff I don't think has any coherence whatsoever. If there was going to be anything, it was going to be on a smaller scale thing, right? And it's going to be localized to Europe in that anyone crosses this line and will launch a nuke at them, right? A tactical nuclear strike on a NATO military unit. That would be the sort of thing. It could also be related to, submarines, etc. But here's the big point I wanted to make. I guarantee you that while Russia, I don't think, understands the full picture of what's going on in the United States, they know that the election was stolen. They know that Trump had a plan. They know that and my suspicion is that they know, or at least strongly suspect, that there is this, how do I put it? Well, that there is that part of the military is not on board with it. And frankly, it's plausible that there's even been direct communication, because in international incidents like this, politicians can say whatever they want, but nuclear command speaks to nuclear command. These highest level people that are outside of even the conventional military, they are in contact with each other, because these are probably the one part of even the U.S. military that has not been compromised. Hasn't been compromised. From what I understand, it hasn't been compromised. It's the most professional, the most patriotic, the most serious people on the fucking planet, the people who work in nuclear command. And in March 15th, 2020, not too long ago, right? 2 days and 2 years ago, out of an abundance of caution, because we may already be at war, Trump shut down Cheyenne Mountain, which is the key facility for for the nuclear forces. So my sense is that the Russian nuclear command has a sense of this. And I actually am coming to the opinion that even within the military itself in the United States, this is increasingly getting filtered down through the command staff. That if you were to talk to a couple of high-ranking generals, they would never say it in public, but they would say, yeah, there is something going on here. Biden doesn't have full control. And you can get a glimpse of this from the standpoint of when you look at what's going on right now, who is pushing who's pushing all of the escalation in the United States? It's the criminals in Congress, right? It's the regime, and of course the media. It's the State Department. It's the intelligence agencies. It's not the Pentagon. Now, I'm not saying that tons of the military are in compromise, and I'm not saying Lloyd Austin is like a good guy. He's a secret white hat. No, he's not a fucking white hat. I'm just saying that I think that this faction has gradually, the nuclear command that didn't recognize the transition of power and never handed off the nuclear football, so to speak, that this group is gradually gaining more and more influence in the conventional military staff. Private conversations here or there. Hey Jim, you remember me? You know, we went to West Point together. This, right? So the point of all this stuff, and so why is it going to be a localized scare in Europe? It's going to be a localized scare in Europe because the only nukes that would even be on the table realistically as a scare event are going to be tactical nukes used by Russia to deter a conventional invasion or attack. It's not the ICBM, Doctor Strangelove stuff. Although, of course, you know, it could escalate to there theoretically. But the initial scare is going to be that there's some kinetic action and really, let's be honest, it's going to be more of a false flag. Well, let me finish my thought first because I keep dancing around it. I don't think British nuclear command, or French for that matter, I don't think either of those countries are, well, I can't speak for France, but I can say, because France has an interesting dynamic with its military, and it's possible, I know that there's a large faction of the French military that's anti-government, so I can't say that for certain. But within Britain, I would be shocked if the cabal does not have control over Britain's nuclear arsenal. And so I think the biggest scare event is going to be on Britain. Britain has also incidentally been the biggest loudmouth in this entire thing in the West, even more of a loudmouth than America. Because we know what's going on, right? It's the Brits behind all of it. The capture of the American government is from the crown and all that stuff, which is in turn, of course, you know, Rothschilds, etc. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. So I think that the scare is mostly going to be European, especially because of all the generational trauma that you see over there in Europe. But what we are going to see next is this big push to manufacture consent, which is going to be probably chemical weapons. They'll do what they did in Syria. They could do something different, but it'll probably be this, oh, Russia is using chemical weapons because they're losing the war. Because here's the thing. If you look at Ukraine right now, there's some very perplexing things going on. Mariupol's almost fallen. It's going to be a couple of days probably. And the encirclement continues in the eastern bloc, in the eastern section. Slavyansk, almost under Russian control, key to the encirclement. The last main stronghold in Luhansk is almost taken. It's almost done in the Donbass, to be fucking honest here. But at the same time, while this is going on, you have the Ukrainian government so Zelensky fired the main Ukrainian general, brought him back to Kiev, and I think his underling took over. But here's what's crazy. You would think if you were Ukraine, if you were thinking from a practical military perspective, you'd say, okay, the encirclement's occurring, we have this big pocket here. We should be trying to do a strategic retreat, right? And see where can we defend Kiev, or at the very least, let's try to create a fortified line. I mean, look, this is obviously would not be politically salient, but if you were really hell-bent on preserving Ukraine, you have a really much stronger pocket of defense in the West that you could do whatever. You could also just make defenses across the Dnieper River. But what they're doing is they're sending everything they have, all recruits, everything they have, they're sending them to the Donbass, which is absurd because they're not going to take the Donbass. The Donbass hasn't even been fully in their control since 2014. And that entire area is getting encircled. So rather than do a strategic withdrawal of as many units as you possibly can, they're sending more in there. And all of this is an indication of the politics of the matter. But the point is, they want to try to make it seem like Ukraine is winning the war. And you could say they want to make it seem like Ukraine's winning the war because it helps their negotiating posture. But the Russians know the thing on the ground. The real reason is that if the Ukrainians are still blocking the Russians ostensibly in that region, then they can say the Russians had to use chemical weapons to break X or Y defense, so that they can say that it's a legitimate false flag. If the Ukrainians have given up half the country, it's going to be less plausible for the false flag to be relevant. So I think that we can expect that false flag. I would be shocked if we don't have the false flag by the end of the month. I think it's likely in the week. But yeah, Jeff, you're saying it exactly. Exactly. The powers that be can't decide if the Ukrainians are winning or if they're martyrs. I mean, it's just a big joke. It's a big joke across the board. They're not in control. I mean, ARVP, Jeff, I mean, they are not in control of the nuclear command, but they have had control of general forces. The question is, are they losing control of general forces because of conversations that are increasingly happening, that are moving from nuclear forces through the rest of conventional forces? My suspicion is that that is occurring, and that there's been a lot of back channeling within the military, and that in the beginning, it was only among this top section, and it's been gradually filtering its way through the command to the right people. They're being keyed in, clued in, just to get the whole situation together, get it all together. So, let's check some of these questions here. What's the Ark of Gabriel? I'm not familiar with that. Prayers up, family, indeed. And by the way, prayers for my wife. She's just taking off right now, so she's on her way over to Poland, hoping she can thread that needle. But nothing's gonna happen. We made the calculus. She's got to go. She's got to go see him. Better now than later, I think. I think it'd be worse later than now. I think we'll thread it. She thread it literally this same time 2 years ago. She went to Australia when all the borders were shutting down. I was like, I don't know if you're going to be able to get back. It's like, well, she hadn't done that. She wouldn't have seen her sister for years. So it was a good decision. AP Odyssey, is Putin totally excommunicated from the Cabal at this point, or are they still connected? No, he's totally excommunicated. I mean, he's been removed from all World Economic Forum stuff. And, that whole stuff is really interesting because people will always ask, oh, well, is he really doing the right thing? Is this all just a scam for all of us? I mean, I made my position clear. I don't believe any of that. It doesn't hold any sort of energetic coherence to me. Cliff talks about how Putin was in this sort of orthodox secret society and that he was almost an infiltrator. I think, frankly, it makes a lot of sense that he was an infiltrator. But you can also make an argument that he came in to power but then pulled away from them. We look at Putin now as he is, but Russia under Putin has actually, we're in like the third phase. So in the first phase of Putin was very pro-Western. Putin, like, in many ways, Putin was more liberal and pro-Western than Yeltsin, right? Who gave the country up to Western interests, basically, to prostitute the country out, prostitute the women out. he was quite liberal in his early years, and had an inclination to join NATO. After 9/11, Russia was the first country to call the United States. The after Towards the late aughts, he became more conservative, but it wasn't even really anything too crazy. It's only really been after Crimea, after the Maidan, that he gradually began this nationalist turn. And so now we're seeing the third phase of Putin, which is this more nationalist. And I think a lot of it is starting to understand that, the West is on the suicide pact and he has to protect Russia. And I agree that the mad teabagger, I mean, you're completely right. I get actually a little bit frustrated when I see a lot of the, truther community. They're just such fucking, in many ways, they're just the opposite of the normies. They still have this like superhero view of things. So it's like there's the bad guys, the white hats and the black hats. We talked about this, right? It's Putin. I think Putin's a good guy. I don't really feel that way about Xi. Someone sent me a video today about the Chinese children in CCP school and talking about everything going on in Russia and Ukraine. And obviously it was pro-Russian stuff, right? I was like extremely disturbed by this sort of classroom dynamic with like all the children following these ridiculous orders and being like robots. And I don't like that stuff. I don't care if it's pro-Russian or not. I don't like that stuff. I don't want anything remotely in the world like that. So I get frustrated with one-dimensional kind of thinking about this kind of stuff. I don't see the CCP ever as an ally. I think Russia is a natural ally geographically, historically, but I don't expect them to act in any way other than in Russia's interest. And I don't blame them for doing that. I don't blame them for that. And I don't think Putin would think twice about killing somebody if it meant helping Russia. But he's made it very clear that Russia is to be a free market country. And they are actually not confiscating most of the assets of other... I mean, there's some tit for tat stuff, but they haven't escalated the economic war like the West has. And it almost looks as if they're trying to tell foreign people, like, you can't trust the West. You could have all your stuff invested there for years and they'll just seize it and freeze it. Whereas in Russia, we want your investment and we respect property rights even when people do this stuff to us. So I think that's a longer term plan for them, especially once the currency gets stabilized. I think it's, plausible to see it get pooled into this, renminbi, rupee sort of, because right now it's looking like there's going to be a renminbi petrodollar kind of thing that's going to emerge. Yeah. I mean, so it's like all this stuff that, like, when I see this stuff, Putin's invading Ukraine, like, notice, like, I saw something today that was just totally retarded. I mean, it just totally retarded. And it was like, Putin has only advanced as far as the biolabs in Ukraine. And he's not going any further. He's only invading Ukraine to take out the biolabs, white hat, blah, blah, blah. Patriots in control, trust the plan. Like, shut the fuck up. Stupid fucking comment. Such a stupid comment. Because first off, there are biolabs in Lviv, so where are Russian troops around Lviv, right? You could debunk this comment in 2 seconds, but the Russian troops are advancing. I mean, I don't understand this stuff. Putin's not going to take any of Ukraine. He's just, clearing out the biolabs. Stop believing absolute nonsense. This is a this is something, Ukraine to Russia is like if the American, think about it like if America lost more soldiers in the Civil War than it lost in every other war put together, and that was 150 years ago. Okay, more than 150 years ago. Ukraine and Russia is a very similar sort of thing. A lot of Russians believe that you don't really even have a Russia without Ukraine. It's kind of like you don't have an America without the South. So you can make all sorts of analogies with this stuff, but the point is, Putin is not going to, at the minimum, seize the eastern half of Ukraine. I mean, it's just absurd. It's just absolutely absurd. So Putin can be revealing things that the West, these corrupt Western leaders are doing, and Putin can and is doing all of that, not only because he hates those people, but because it serves Russian interest. And by the way, annexing Ukraine, or most of Ukraine, is probably also part of that interest. This is just a fucking reality. These guys are not altruistic. They're not altruistic. They're reasonable. They're not altruistic. And so if you think for 2 seconds that if Putin has the perfect opportunity to take back Ukraine, that he's not going to do it, then you're dumb. You're not taking anything seriously. Multiple layers to this. Yeah, I mean, I actually would even go so far as to say Putin's a white hat. But is he a white hat in the same sense as Trump? No. But Trump's a white hat for America. Like, they understand each other. In all likelihood, Trump bought Putin necessary time. There's this big thing. If Putin had invaded all of Ukraine in 2014, backed the separatist movements, people don't remember, back in 2014, Ukraine had like a 6,000 person standing army. Like, it was basically non-existent. Which is why, by the way, all these militias were able to rise up and actually take control of territory, because there was really not much of a military to stop them. Now, as of the Russian invasion, there's 150,000 Ukrainian troops, all supplied mostly, I mean, they have some old Soviet arms, but enormous amounts of modern arms from the Western countries. Ukraine spent 5% of GDP every single year since 2014 on defense. The United States, in its biggest year, spent 4%. I mean, it's an enormous amount of defense budget. Of course, some was probably skimmed off in corruption, but the point of the matter is that Ukraine massively augmented its military force, 150,000 armed soldiers with good technology. I mean, frankly, Ukraine is probably the strongest army in Europe. Being realistic here. Non-Russian Europe, of course. So why didn't he make the move back in 2014? A couple other things weren't in place. You could make the argument, of course, about the economics. Russia was very integrated with the Western financial system at that point. They're not anymore. Even before the sanctions, they were prepared for this stuff. But we all remember Hillary Clinton was supposed to start a war with Russia. And that was part of their plan. And when she didn't get elected, that didn't happen. Trump didn't push that level with Putin. But I'll close on this, I would say. What I've come to understand about Trump, because people have asked, like, well, why didn't he do this? Why didn't he do that? Why didn't he, clear out this part of the swamp? What I think is that, and Putin talked about this in an interview, he said, you can have a Western leader, and the Western leader has all these good ideas, and he gets into power, and then these men in briefcases come over, and they basically tell him how things are supposed to be. And then all the policies change. Doesn't matter what he ran on, what he wanted to do. The point of this is to indicate that the president is not really in control of the country. And what I think happened is that Trump got in power. I'm not even sure to what extent they expected to be able to last a second term. But when they got in, I don't think they had necessarily a full-on plan from the very beginning, an awareness of everything. But once Trump got in the office, it became apparent immediately that this thing was going down. Like, I don't want to be, it's not a black pill statement, but I think that Trump and the other white hats in the U.S., military, when Trump got into power, they looked around and they're like, there's no way to salvage this thing. This thing is fucked. It's cooked to like so many different degrees. There's no way you can clean it up. You have to let it collapse. They're not going to stop. You can't block it. All you can do is set traps for them, right? Legal traps for them, and to do this devolution thing, which gives the American public some level of continuity of government while this whole thing gets smoked out. The normie, even like the normie pluses, the people who are adjacent to us, who can kind of see the corruption, see the cabal, but don't see it quite on the level that we see it, that we talk about it, the conspiratorial. They're not quite on our level with the conspiratorial stuff. These people still are like, Trump should have done this. Trump didn't have good advice. I actually don't believe any of that stuff whatsoever. I think that, I'm not saying he didn't make mistakes. I'm sure they made mistakes. They're fighting politically in there, and I think that you can tell pretty clearly that Sessions was somebody that he thought he could trust, and he put him in a key position and trusted him to do something, and he fucked up. He didn't do it. I don't think he betrayed him. I just think he fucked up. I think he waffled. He wasn't able to do what he was supposed to do, and that created a cascade effect of problems. But fundamentally, they accomplished their main purpose. We'll see. Enjoy the show, as they say. But yeah, I just think when he came into that office and he saw, as he gradually came to understand exactly what was going on, I think that they knew, I don't know how we can clean this shit up internally. There has to be, and that all goes to the plan of allowing them to steal the election. Because there was an understanding that if you were to even try to hold this position, it would collapse underneath of you, because there's so many, if you're in a termite infested building and you're trying to hold it, at a certain point you're just like, you know what, let him eat it, let it collapse. Jeff, I think you're totally right. Trump is much better at seeing skill set than he is at seeing character. I agree with that. And I think maybe to be a little bit more, nuanced, so to speak, I think he sees character, but I think his issue is that he always has to give people chances. He won't tank somebody before they tank themselves. So I think he can see it, but he can't, he has to let them wound him. And I've heard some psychoanalysis of this with him. I've also heard about his astro, which is that he was very much dismissed by his father. And so he's always had this kind of big thing about, loyalty and everything. He's always wanted to get the acknowledgement and loyalty of people. I think it's pretty apparent with him. So he's very good to people, but that allows him to get betrayed quite a bit. Let me see here. The Mad Teabagger. I believe it is in Putin. Oh, wait, I'm going to go a little bit further up first. Yeah, Ukrainians have also been fighting each other enough to have been weakened since 2014. Well, that's true, but they've been getting so much arms. I mean, and the Donbass militias have been getting arms as well. But the Donbass, I mean, I'm not even sure if you can call them Ukrainians. I mean, they don't even identify with that label at all. So, and unfortunately, the thing about conflict is that it improves their combat effectiveness, the ones who make it out. And I will make this other point. It is, I said this in a previous show, but we are looking at 20% of Russian military deployed in Ukraine, I believe. It's about 20% of Russian military deployed in Ukraine. And it's not the frontline units. This is all old Soviet equipment. And while it does seem like the Russians made a miscalculation, they thought that the country would go quietly as it would have done in 2014. The years of Ukrainian propaganda, definitely turned the population harder. There wasn't nearly as many defections as was expected. In my sense is that a lot of that had to do with Western intelligence agencies kind of sealing those gaps. But at any rate, what you essentially have is that the Russians didn't send in a lot of units quickly, and they actually sent a lot of National Guard units in early on in the invasion, which, Rosgodavia, right, which are really more policing units. They're not really designed to be combat used. So it took them about almost 2 weeks to send their entire invasion force in, which was late. So I think that they were thinking that there'd be more surrenders. You can also see this with the parajumps. Like, you would only do these sort of parajumps in the Gostomel, like behind enemy lines, if you thought that there wasn't going to be, you'd have rapid advance. None of that happened. The point of all this stuff, though, is just basically to say that whether it was completely intentional out of naivety, or whether it was intentional out of a grander strategy, Russia has sent its not frontline units and mostly old equipment, especially old ground equipment, into Ukraine. They're using all this old Soviet equipment, which makes sense. And it makes sense in the standpoint, that it's still comparable or superior to what the Ukrainians have. And of course, they still have better missile and air power, etc. But the big thing here is that if there is a war with NATO, you want to have your best units completely ready and fresh. And I think that's what's been happening, because there's another whole 60% of Russia's military waiting, and it's the best units. They have not been deployed in Ukraine. No disrespect to the units on the ground, of course. I mean, the Chechens are really good at urban fighting, and they're heavily deployed. But the standard Russian military, I mean, think about that for a second, right? The Chechens are the best units fighting in Ukraine right now. The Chechens are really good warriors, but they are kind of a separate paramilitary group. It begs a lot of questions. Why hasn't the most professional, the most elite part, standard part of the Russian military been deployed? I think that they want to save their best units in case NATO tries anything. It's possible they were also naive. But anyway, I got on this whole tangent because you have the added benefit is, while you lose recruits in a war like this, they also gain combat experience. They become better for it. It's just a fact of war. So the Ukrainians, by the fact that they have actually been fighting for 8 years, they actually are experienced. So in many ways, the Donbass war hasn't bled the Ukrainians terribly, but it has given their units experience in combat. So probably a net negative for Russia in that sense. Okay, so now the mad teabagger. I believe it is in Putin and Russia's interest to expose the corruption in our government and helping the White Hats, because this is a game for the whole world, and if America follows, Russia will be the next biggest target. I 100% agree with that. And that's the nuance, right? It's not a matter of Trump and Putin are working together, they're in the bunker talking together. No, they have mutual interests. And I think that Russia and Putin is a constructive world member. Again, I don't feel that way about China. I think that this is all opportunism for China. They see their chance to collapse the U.S. They're going to take it. They wanted to do that for the last 60 years. They used the cabal to help rot us out from the inside. I don't think that they're constructive world partners. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I don't see it. When I see that video of those CCP children, when I see the World Economic Forums, that their social credit system is mirrored exactly on China's, I don't trust them for 2 seconds. Sorry, don't do it. Mad Teabagger again. Well, this army vet can't live on hope, so I have spent my time since I got out preparing for the worst possible outcome. I sold my house in Florida, moved to the mountains, been stocking up on food and ammo. Well, look, you're going to be fine. I'm not, you know, you're going to be more prepared than most of us. I'm, you know, I have a lot of my own personal stuff I got to go through. I'm just holding out hope, having faith that it's not going to get to that point. If we ever hit a collapse like that, I do have some contingencies, but crazy to think about. This is a late COVID cabal, isn't it, Elvis? I appreciate you guys being here for it. I just, I was feeling it. I'm not going to be back for a few days, so timeline stuff is bugging me out. Mad Teabagger, this is why it's laughable to believe Ukraine is winning when Russia has not even fully engaged their military. If he wanted to, he could have steamrolled Ukraine in a few days. 100%. I mean, but this wasn't shock and awe, right? They didn't want to do shock and awe. And this is, again, to all these people, he wants to, he wants the population to be aligned with Russia, and he wants probably to annex the infrastructure and the territory at the end of the day. And this is the whole thing with the negotiations. I think it's possible in the beginning, that there was going to be this Ukraine that was going to exist at the end of it. It's less and less every day. I've been hearing that now there's going to be a Kherson People's Republic. It's just going to keep going. It's just going to keep going. The longer they continue to delay these negotiations, and that it's happening because the Western leaders, look, these speeches, right? Zelensky going before Congress and saying, I have a dream, quoting Martin Luther King. Get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck out of here. This stuff is it's so absurd. It's literally like a dog shit Hollywood script. The Duran used that quote. I think it's completely correct. It's like a Hollywood script. The speech was probably written for him from people in America, all to manufacture consent. They should have sent more leather and heels to Zelensky, hearts and minds and all that. Oh, man. That was a video I couldn't unsee. Is Pompeo loyal or not? That's a good question, and the answer is I have no idea. I have no idea. He was wearing the boot, some kind of weird stuff with the, wanting Taiwan to declare independence from China. Seems like a provocation to China. It's really tough to tell. Is he a double agent? I have to tell you, I never got bad vibes from Pompeo, though. I never got bad vibes from him. So, but I also will say I never got crazy strong vibes one way or another. But I got mostly positive from him. I always thought he was a good guy. And even now with all this stuff, I haven't gotten a negative sense like I got from Pence. So I'm going to say he's a good guy. I'm going to say he's a good guy. Some weird stuff. I don't know. I would say that there are more than likely a small part of Russian special forces on the ground, but they are more than likely being used for evidence collection. Well, I 100% agree. I didn't mean to discount that. I mean, Spetsnaz is, of course, all over the place with an operation like this. I just meant in terms of general forces. It's kind of like the Chechens are almost like Russia's. You could actually argue that they're special forces in their own right. I mean, the Chechens at this point kind of seem like they're the Army Rangers of the Russian Federation. They they have that very specific kind of skill set, but yeah, it's not the standard Russian forces. Um, it's interesting. You know, Chechnya is interesting anyway. It's kind of like country produces nothing. And I said country, but I mean it is a nation at least. That nation produces nothing at all except for warriors. You know, it's like literally the Highlanders, Highland Scots. Um, they Russia subsidizes something like 60 to 80% of the economy of Chechnya, but in return they get this super loyal band of hardened fighters. Of course, you know, super loyal after the purge. Everybody doesn't. It's I understand it's a complicated matter if you don't know the history of it, but Kadyrov's father was assassinated by the Chechnyan separatists. So people are like, Chechnyans supporting Russia? It's like, these are different Chechnyans. The other Chechnyans were kicked out of Russia and are actually fighting with the Ukrainians in many cases. So that's another reason Kadyrov wanted to go there, in my estimation, is that there's a bit of a blood feud. He wanted to take out some of the people who had harbored his blood enemies. Matthias, hey, 1:44 a.m. in Argentina is just when you guys get the party started. That's pregame starts at 1:44 a.m. in Argentina. God, it was like the worst, man. You just couldn't get anything done in Argentina. How did your final exam season wrap up, Pat? Mine has been pretty good, to be honest. You know, I feel ready for the next stage. Yeah, it was good. And by the way, someone asked me earlier, one of you guys asked me about what Paul thought about this. Paul agreed with the timeline stuff. He agreed that there were some shifts, a lot of weird energy. A lot of people were feeling it. He was saying, so. The Russian military opened the dam blocking the water Crimea. Yep, in Kherson. Pompeo seems to ride that fine line between white hat and deep state, maybe saying stuff to not get killed. Yeah. I don't know. I haven't gotten bad energy vibes from him, but it's always a bit jarring to see the boot. You know, we know what the boot is. Russia sending Chechens is like Great Britain sending Gurkhas, highly skilled but expendable because they're not truly Russian nationals. Another very, very good point, Jeff. Yeah, the casualties are not going to affect the Russian population in the same way. And the Chechens don't even really care because to them it's part of the sport. You know, they're loyal to Kadyrov. If Kadyrov wants to... And by the way, Kadyrov's like the only one in Russia who seems to understand propaganda. He's just like he's like a meme lord. It seems like Chechnya, between like Kadyrov and that little dwarf Hezbollah, it's like the Chechens and Dagestanis seem to really have TikTok meme warfare down. I agree, you got to think about the number of conflicts there have been in that area the last 50 years. A lot of them grew up on war. Yep, exactly. Well, guys, it's late. Matthias, I'm sorry you caught the tail end of this, but we'll definitely do one or two, at least one next week if not two. But I hope you guys all enjoy your weekends, and I love you as always. Have a great night.